Saint Jeanne Antide, a woman totally given to God and to the poor. Junior 8 meeting, the stages of the spiritual life of Jeanne Antide. Good afternoon. Today, we are going to speak of the stages of the spiritual life of Jeanne Antide. To speak of stages in a spiritual life means to acknowledge changes in a way of thinking or a behavior and the passages which lead to greater openness, to greater inner freedom, to greater maturity, to greater holiness. Likewise, Jeanne Antide's journey was marked by successive stages, most of which were triggered by external events. Two distinct parts mark the life of Jeanne Antide, hence the development of her spiritual life. The first part is the time of the promise, which takes place before her encounter with the great vicars of Besançon, who entrusted to her a mission. It is there in London that her vocation was definitively strengthened. It was there that she found her place in the church, and she definitively risked all her life for the good of the church and the poor. She was 34 years old. This encounter with the priests of Besançon in London did not take place after a long time of preparation. It was preceded by a full development that we know from the manuscript of Sister Rosalie. During this period, the development of the spiritual life of Jeanne Antide was conditioned above all by the circumstances. The second part, which we can call the time of realizations, the time of the alliance, began with her return from Switzerland to Besançon in order to implement the mission that she received. So we go to the time of the promise, first part. Jeanne Antide discovers her vocation and tries to answer to it. In this first part of her life, we can distinguish 4 stages according to the places where she lived. In Sassé, in the family, first of all, she discovered her vocation and she started her research to the way of realizing her vocation, which led Jeanne Antide to join the Daughters of Charity in Paris. The second stage in Paris with the Daughters of Charity, where she learned about religious life, and there were the first reaction to the French Revolution, which ended up with her return to her family. And then in Besançon and Saint-Cyr, she was sent away from Paris because of the revolution, and Jeanne Antide lived her vocation serving the church and the people of the village. But the dimension of religious life was not there. That's why she decided to go to Switzerland to follow Father Recever. In Switzerland and in Germany, Jeanne Antide questioned the way of living her vocation within the congregation of the solitaries. It was the time of uncertainty and questioning. Until the encounter in Landeron, in Switzerland, the spiritual life of Jeanne Antide seemed marked by the discovery of her vocation and by the question, what journey to follow to live my vocation, The development of her spiritual life is known by her reactions, by her choices in the different environments where she lived. And this constant effort to, on one side, to respond to God and also to respond on the other side to the needs of the poor. In fact, following the events, she gave herself completely to God in solitude, in prayer, poverty, and penance. And she felt attracted by gestures of mutual help and service recommended in the Gospel of Matthew, which she already practiced daily. In the name of Jesus Christ, to feed the hungry, to quench the thirst of the thirsty, to clothe the naked, to console, to give comfort, to enlighten, and to heal. So in this first stage, Jeanne Antide discovered the call of God and tries to find out how to respond to it. We know very little about Jeanne Antide's childhood. Her mother and her godmother taught her to pray and how to behave as a Christian before God and before others. After the death of her mother, she found herself alone and to lead the family life and to respond to the needs of her family. She was also alone in thinking about her own future. While waiting, she looks after everybody, she cares for all the relatives, and she gets together with other young women in the parish, and always according to the manuscript, Jeanne Antide tries to look for the will of God, and one of the serpents, which was a thief and immoral, according to Sister Rosalie, wanted to lead her into evil. And Jeanne Antide attributes her resistance to her to a special grace from the Lord. Thus, full of gratitude, she offered him her life forever, making a vow of chastity without knowing exactly what her answer would be. And she wanted just to belong entirely to God. And she entrusted her decision to Mary. The point of departure of her personal life that is known to us is the moment where she becomes aware of God's love for her, manifested through the grace of being protected from evil, hence giving rise to the definitive offering of her life in thanksgiving to the Lord. It is not forbidden to think that a desire for religious life had inhibited her for a long time. Such a radical decision in front of danger seems to indicate that the idea of definitive gift to God had already touched her heart as a possible path, but she never mentioned it directly. How religious life was more convenient to her wish, but where? With the hospitals in Baume-les-Dames, with the possibility of being able to cure the sick, or at the Carmel, in view of giving priority to prayer and penance. She is attracted by both, and these are difficult to be reconciled. A visit to the Carmelite convent of Besançon helped her to discern and understand that God wanted her for the poor. It She had then to put it into action, and her father presented her the possibility of getting married, but nothing could shake her decision, and her father finally gave her the blessing. So Jeanne Antide left her home forever to join the Daughters of Charity of Saint Vincent de Paul. This first stage, which marked the transition from a sociological faith to a more personal faith, ended in a conclusive manner. Jeanne Antide will be a religious at the service of the
S'ouvre alors une deuxième étape avec l'entrée dans la vie religieuse.
There was then a second stage, the time in religious life, marked by her learning this new life at the school of Saint Vincent de Paul, and also facing the French Revolution. The time spent with the Daughters of Charity enabled Jeanne Antide to live her two dreams without tension, in spite of the numerous events caused by the revolution that would lead her, that could have led her to abandon her vocation. Jeanne Antide had prepared herself for a life of service to the poor, following in the footsteps of Saint Vincent de Paul. She was illiterate and could barely read, but she knew how to work hard. In Paris, during the novitiate, and in the communities where she was sent for her mission, she discovered various elements which characterize the Daughters of Charity: prayer, community life, and service to the sick, as it was lived in those days. During the novitiate, she was not afraid, but she fell ill, and this made her worried about the possibility of realizing her wish to give herself to God. And then there was also the French Revolution, which blocked her plans. The church was persecuted. The priests were obliged to swear the oath of faithfulness, of fidelity to the revolution. And so she was obliged to hide and to go into exile in order to avoid being imprisoned. Jeanne Antide always refused any compromise, and she, in the name of freedom, the national chambers decreed sent away all the religious, and they gave passports to the religious so that they could go back to their home. And Jeanne Antide went back to Besançon and then to Saint-Cyr, though she was determined to remain religious and to go abroad if necessary to keep her vocation. During this second stage, Jeanne Antide faced great difficulties, illness, persecution, which strengthened her vocation. And then we had the third stage when she returned to Saint-Cyr. And what did she do there? She made herself useful, and she was more aware that her vocation was not just about religious life. She made her useful to the people of the village in different ways. She took care of the sick people. She opened schools to teach catechism to children and to protect them from the influence of the revolution. She helped the hidden priests and the parishioners, assuring them a Christian life in the village. She also trained herself to fulfill the numerous tasks of pastoral life. These functions were important, and she became aware of this later on. It was a hint of what her congregation would do in the future. Nevertheless, at the moment, always in search for religious life and making the most of her respite in the revolution, Jeanne Antide answered the call of Father Receveur, established at the Swiss border, with those who were called, those religious called the solitaires. She hoped to rediscover the setting of religious life while serving the members of the community. But this wish was stopped by the events. She walked, she journeyed with the sick people, and this made her aware that to serve God demands also to serve people in all aspects. She saw many of the sick people die, and the rule applied with severity by the responsible did not allow her to follow the sick as well as she wanted to, and comforting them. And so her conscience did not allow her to let them die without the sacraments of the church. And so slowly she realized that she did not share the values of that community. And slowly she understood that that wasn't what God wanted from her. At the heart of her prayer, she understood that she had to leave this group of solitaries and leave, and these events are a sign and and she go back to her own freedom, confident that God will show her his will. She started her journey, and she walked for 2 months in extreme poverty and praying with an act of faith and confidence in God. And like Moses, she went through the darkness, and she went to Antide, where she was reconforted, and the monk whom she asked to talk to reconforted her in her decision to go back to France and her belonging to the tradition of Saint Vincent de Paul. He told her, God wants you in France, and the abandoned youth is waiting for you. Go like a good daughter of Saint Vincent de Paul to take care of the poor, and you will do a lot of good. And this was the beginning of the time of the Alliance. Jeanne Antide accepted her mission from the church, and she prepared herself to live it. This is the the fifth stage. First of all, in Switzerland, in Landeron, Jeanne Antide received her mission. In Landeron, she arrived, and in the simplicity of the house of the family of Rochot, the request made to Jeanne Antide was solemn. I order you, said the great vicar, speaking on behalf of the Bishop of Besançon, with a clear order. Be ready to go back to France in 15 days' time for a pastoral, educative, and a social pastoral work, in order to contribute in the reforming of the diocese after the years of the revolution, and to educate the religious people to religious life, a group of young women who decided to help her in this task. Jeanne Antide understood quickly, but she found it difficult to follow it. And she wonders how she can realize this order and by what means. So far, Jeanne Antide had directed her life alone, according to the events, with the grace of the Holy Spirit and the advice of the confessors. But she had taken those decisions on her own, and those decisions concerned her alone. Now the church was there asking her to do something which was God's will, and she cannot fail to accept. And the obstacles disappeared gradually. She returned to Besançon, and there she went first to Saint, but the realization of the mission was still far because the revolution resumed and obliged her into hiding as an exile, because she had gone abroad. She was considered a traitor and deserved death. So she was hidden in a small room given to her by a woman, and she lived cloistered in absolute silence, fearing to be denounced and discovered. She spent weeks and months, and finally a message informed her that she could get a passport authorizing her to go back to Saint without being persecuted. It was a stage of great uncertainty. Jeanne Antide learned through her practical experience that she can live only receiving everything from God. Her life is definitively marked by this, and she will continue among many obstacles, but certain that whatever the path she will undertake, God will do everything to lead her and to attract her for the service of the poor. In Besançon, through many difficulties, she began her mission. This is the stage of realization and the stage of maturity. She dared to open a school for poor children while she could hardly write herself, teaching young women who had just experienced the revolution, introduce them to religious life, to serve God and the poor, the church, and their country, to write a rule to support their spiritual life and practical life without traumas and to respond to the needs of the administration and facing the daily struggles and to face the traps that are made by those who were jealous of her. Jeanne Antide collaborated with those working in the society of those days. She became known to the authorities in Besançon and then in Paris during the chapter of 1870. And she kept praying and was sure that God was with her, and she faced all these situations with firmness and common sense, and she continued to realize her mission. And she understood that the obstacles brought up by her enemies were a way to let the will of God realize itself. And then she became a mother to her daughters and to the poor. The country was slowly recovering. The poor were less numerous. She found balance between the two dimensions of her vocation. What should she do more than that? Will God come again to lead her? It was then that there is a seventh stage by the orders of the sovereign of those days. Jeanne Antide went to Naples. There, the civil society showed her the needs of the poor. Jeanne Antide there finds there again the will of God for her. And she understood that was God's voice that spoke to her in this way. Through Madame Laetitia, the mother of Napoleon, Jeanne Antide, with two other congregations, was invited to go to Naples, but the other two congregations refused this invitation, while Jeanne Antide accepted. And in a spontaneous and generous gesture, just as she had done in the past when the poor of Bellevaux appealed to her, she was available to go there with 6 of her sisters. So there is a new stage there in the growth, spiritual growth of Jeanne Antide, openness to the foreign countries, a new life, and new struggles. Jeanne Antide faced the difficulties of the realization of this project and accompanies the sisters for a few months. But the priest in Besançon did not offer her to go with them. So she understood that there would be many difficulties getting familiar with the language, the climate, but also the administrators, and also with the needs of the poor. The request mentioned also the possibility of establishing a novitiate in Naples. That meant also to welcome young women and understand if they were really called by the Lord before forming them to a pure religious life. And Jeanne Antide experienced the presence of God there. Along the days with her sisters, she faced the difficulties and found how to work to relieve from the poverty which were surrounded her. The news received from Besançon informed her that after the death of Monsignor Lecoz, which always supported her, the sisters were increasingly conditioned by Monsignor de Chapois, who had been appointed as Superior General until the appointment of the successor of Monsignor Lecoz. Monsignor de Chapois is more and more influential and does not ask for her advice as a superior. So, and he decided without talking to Jeanne Antide, he changes the composition of the council of the congregation. Should they obey to their superiors who threatened them to send her away if they were faithful to Jeanne Antide? Informed by the sisters there, she understood the situation of the sisters and she felt that the rule of life approved by Monsignor Lecoz was the cause of many problems. So how could she solve this problem for a congregation which is also developing abroad? Therefore, we reach to the eighth stage of the fidelity of Jeanne Antide to the Universal Church that caused a fracture between the communities of Besançon and Naples. She felt that turning to the Pope was the best way to solve the situation, and this could have the advantage of introducing her congregation into the universality of the Church, solving the division between the establishments in Naples and those in Besançon. Jeanne Antide found herself before the choice that wasn't personal because it involved the life of the congregation. Her heart was broken, and she carried this prayer on herself as Jesus carried the cross. The prayer rightly states what was important for her spiritual life, marked by faith in the one who sometimes seems to have abandoned her and who apparently no longer comes to see her in her sadness. Did she favor one part of her congregation to the detriment of the other one? Did she want something too big for her? Had she to refuse going to Naples and remain in France to obtain Napoleon's decree and so to ensure the existence of the communities in France? She found peace only in prayer, in the certainty that she had always followed only God's will, manifested through the approval of the Pope. Then she went back to France with the hope that through her presence she would be able to ease the conflicts, bring peace to the sisters, and reestablish the connection between Naples and Besançon, and accept this gift coming from above, which was the rule of life, but she was refused from Monsignor de Pressigny. He had a regional vision, stressed by the going back of the royalty to the head of the country, and also the international vision, which according to her was the only one which was coherent with the Church of Jesus Christ. But this was not what Monsignor de Pressigny thought. So Jeanne Antide went back to Naples without being able to speak to the Archbishop of Besançon, without being able to see the sisters there, and but she still hopes that there will be a day in which God will show his power and break all the resistances. Her broken heart will be consoled. The congregation developed in Naples. The novitiate was made up of French and Neapolitan sisters. A new community was established in Tagliacozzo, and the grace granted to Jeanne Antide was, and the congregation opened communities in 4 continents, continuing to love and serve Jesus Christ and the poor everywhere.